I don't know you. I don't think we've ever met. You can correct me if that's wrong. I know about you. I know that increasingly people are talking about you in a more mainstream environment.
Look at Nick's body language in his face. I mean, I'm not an expert, but the he's tense. He's expecting this to be a hostile interaction. Like, I feel like this is going to play out in a significant way in how this interview goes. But I just look at the difference in these two. I mean, Piers has got years and years of experience, so he may be deliberately masking. He may do that in interviews a lot because I think he wants to at least present as an unbiased interviewer. But Nick is like, this is not how Nick looks, just ranting at the camera on his show.
Than you may be used to. So for those of you who know nothing about Nick Fuentes, I want this to be an opportunity to get to the real person. I don't know who that person is, but I do want to use this opportunity to get there. I've seen you talk as we prepared for this in exchanges with people and on.
He's breathing, is tense. He's flexing his jaw.
Your show saying you fear it's going to be very hostile, it's going to be an ambush, all those kind of things. I don't intend it to be overtly hostile. I don't intend to ambush you. I intend it to be an examination of what you said on the record, an examination of what you believe or what you say you believe, and an examination of what your rising popularity says about the state of the conservative movement in America. So those are my goals from this interview. What are your goals? Why are you doing it?
That's a great question, because I'm literally sitting here thinking, why would he do this? This is almost unexpected. I'm curious to see what he responds with.
I thought it'd be interesting. And, you know, you've talked a lot about me on your show over the years, and this is the first time you actually extended the invitation. I think it might be the second, actually. I think we talked about doing it during A24 a few years ago, but you've talked a lot about me with the panel, and now you've extended the invitation to talk to me. And I think it'd be interesting for me to maybe clarify some positions and maybe get to know you a little better as well. So I'm looking forward to it.
There is a belief that you have two personas. There's one that you roll out now for podcasts and for shows like mine, where you come across as reasonable. And then there's your show on Rumble, where you often come across as having, you know, a very unreasonable view on things. This is what Coleman Hughes said about you.
I've observed that. I can absolutely see what Piers is saying here. I mean, I definitely, in my experience, I too have noticed that there seems to be like a version of Nick that, honestly, to me, there seem to be two versions, and it feels like to me there's a possibility that Nick is sort of doing online what we all might do in person. And that is to say, when he is on his Rumble show, think, you know, the analogy is that's when he's with his close circle of friends. So he's willing to make more off-color jokes. He's willing to say things that are a little edgier, whether or not he means them and all their intrinsic, you know, impact necessarily. We just feel safer with people we trust. And then he's got to feel, especially with how his life has gone, that when he goes on somebody's podcast, there's always a potential element. If maybe he assumes this with every single one, where the person's trying to trap him or get a clip or make him out to look bad. And he is younger, so I feel like it's worth considering that he might actually be trying to not be misunderstood. But let's see how the interview goes. I do agree with Piers that it at least seems that way. It may be that way or it may not, where he's consciously creating this deceptive persona with interviewers that he doesn't have on his Rumble show. But there at least is a marked difference a lot of the time when he goes on someone else's podcast, how he presents, the way he couches the things he says, versus on his podcast where he just seems like unfiltered and often deliberately incendiary.
Nick Fuentes knows exactly what he's doing. He is consciously playing this double game as part of a long-term strategy to become popular enough to take the reins of power, at which point he plans to pivot towards the extreme and unpopular policies that he advocates daily on Rumble.
So first of all, what is your response to that?
Well, first of all, I would say that Coleman Hughes is a propagandist. He works for the Free Press, which is run by Barry Weiss. So I think you have to consider the source. And Barry Weiss is a pro-Israel partisan. Free Press is just bought out by CBS for $150 million by Larry Ellison or his son, David Ellison. And so I think that's coming from a particular point of view. We can't pretend like that's coming from a vacuum or from some fixed position. That's coming from a propaganda outlet that's in favor of Israel. That's first. But second, I would say he is right about the two personas. And I think that everybody understands this on some level. On my show, I make jokes and I use rhetoric and I'm hyperbolic because for a long time I had an audience that was small on these like dissident platforms. I was on D Live for many years. A lot of people don't even know what that is. And so I had a small following and we had sort of like an in-group sense of humor and memes and things like that. And you talk about it one way on a freewheeling live stream when I'm by myself and I'm ranting and we make jokes and we play devil's advocate, we play with different positions. But then when you sit down in an interview like this one and people ask me a good faith question, what do you actually believe? Well, then I clarify and I say, well, here I'm not joking. Here I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm not being rhetorical. I'll tell you precisely what I believe. As far as this idea that I'm going to get power and then turn into Hitler, that just sounds totally insane to me. I'll be honest. It just sounds insane.
So he's saying exactly what I said. It remains to be seen. I have a feeling, if I know Piers, that he's going to push back that this may or may not be genuine. This may not be honest on Nick's part. But if we take it what he's saying at face value, he's describing what I said, which is that it's the in group on his Rumble stream, and he's in more of a professional setting, if you will, when he goes on these podcasts. So that is the distinction that I assume, because that's how it feels. It feels like the social dynamics that you get in conversations. And that's what Nick is presenting. We'll see how Piers does or doesn't push back on that.
Do you have aspirations for political power?
Not really. I think that if I wanted to run for office, I wouldn't say a lot of the things that I say. I don't know that a lot of people would vote for me. I tend to offend everybody, even a lot of people that like me. So no, I'm a truth teller. I like to tell the truth. I like to do my live stream.
Who is Nick Fuentes? Tell me about your upbringing. I know you grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. Tell me about your early years.
Sure. Or early how? Like my childhood or a little bit later?
Yeah, your childhood, yeah.
Well, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago in LaGrange Park, as you say. My parents are ethnics. My father's half Mexican, half Irish. My mother's Italian. And they both came from a pretty rough upbringing themselves. They both were raised by single mothers, not because of divorce, but because both of their fathers had died. They endured a lot of dysfunction. And I think that's one of the reasons they came together and they related to each other and they wanted to create a normal upbringing for their children. They wanted to have a normal family life. And so they moved out to LaGrange Park away from the city. And they raised me and my sister and really put us first. I think that's a big reason why I tend to have a lot of these family values or Christian values. My mother quit her job and stayed at home to raise us. And so I have a very close relationship with my parents, with my sister. We're a very tight family. And we grew up in a pretty idyllic town. And maybe we can sort of get into a conversation about politics from this. I loved my upbringing. My mom stayed at home. My dad was working. We're in a mostly white suburb in Chicago. I was maybe half Catholic, half Protestant. It was a baseball town. I played baseball for many years. In Chicago, we love our hot dogs. We have our baseball parade and get a hot dog. And so I love where I came from. I love the city. It's a working class city. I love the people here. They're very good, humble, down to earth, decent people. And I guess I had my political, not to jump ahead, but this is a big part of where my political awakening came from. I sort of left this bubble, if you could call it that. When I went to college in 2016, I went to Boston University and I read a lot of things online and I realized the country does not look like LaGrange Park. It doesn't look like Western Springs or Hinsdale or Elmhurst. It looks very different. The country's undergoing a radical transformation because of immigration. And so I saw that and I said, this is not really a desirable change. I don't like the south side of Chicago or the west side or LA or certain parts of Boston as much as I like where I came from. And I guess that's what made me an American nationalist. I said, I want to preserve my home and the things that are familiar to me and the things I like about my home, what makes it America.
So here he's like explaining his experience and kind of the inception point for some of his views. So I'm curious if Piers is going to kind of, I don't know if respect is the right word, but respect that, because I mean, most of the liberties that we are supposed to be in support of as Americans do have to do with difference of opinion. Obviously, there's a sandbox we get to play in. There's the law, there's the Constitution, but he's basically saying, that his lived experience has led him to this point. I'm curious how Piers will respond to that.
So that's a little bit about my background. I don't know where you want to go with that, but that's kind of where I came from.
My first obvious question is, were your parents immigrants to the United States, or were their parents, or were they grandparents? In other words, at some stage, I presume there were immigrants in your family who came to the US. Is that correct?
There were. I believe my mother was fourth generation and my father was third generation. So their ancestors came here on my mom's side in the 1860s, I believe, the first wave of Italian immigration. My father's ancestors, I think they came around at the turn of the century in 1900.
So your view of immigration, and we'll get to the specifics about your views on immigration, are they not affected at all by the fact that if it wasn't for immigration, you wouldn't exist as an American?
Well, I would certainly exist, but like you said, maybe not as an American. Certainly that's influenced in some measure. But I think that the kind of immigration that we had for a long time in the country, it's different than the immigration that we have now. And let's just say for openers,
a lot of people think that, by the way. We have a populace in America that it seems like is in a lot of ways very vehement on certain issues that they're ignorant about or not well enough educated on to justify the kind of strength with which they hold that position, whatever their position may be, raging left, hyper-conservative right, somewhere in the middle. And if you look at like the street interviews, I know that represents a portion and not all of like Americans, but so many have no clue. Like they don't know basic things about our geography. They don't know basic things about our government, but they'll have a very loud opinion on certain things. So anyways, Nick is not alone in this belief. A lot of people are like, it's not that there's a difference in being completely against immigration, in which case you go, okay, then I guess all the European descent people should remove themselves and give the whole country back to Native Americans. Like clearly in numerous stages of its life, the United States have been a country of immigration. So like basically that is to say people can be in opposition to the way immigration is currently or to certain aspects of mass immigration without saying all immigrants are bad or no one should ever have immigrated, no one should ever immigrate. They're two different things, and that's what Nick is relaying here, and there's a lot of people that agree with him.
It's different immigrants. They're coming from a different place with a different culture, a different religion. It's not the same as it was. So first, you have a qualitative difference. My ancestors, for the most part, I have 3 European grandparents from Ireland and Italy, 1 from Mexico. They came from Europe. They came from a society where there's a common ancestry, there's a common religion, common civilization. The people that have come in since 65, since Hart-Celler, they're coming from China, India, the Northern Triangle, Mexico, Venezuela. And so first, they're just different people. Secondly, it's a quantitative difference. There's way more, and it's an unceasing, always increasing wave. For the first 3 or 4 waves of immigration, you would have a major influx of immigrants and then it would stop. And then you'd have another wave and then it would stop. This one, it just keeps going up for 35 years and it's too many. So that's really where I would draw the distinction between maybe where I originate from. I would even just simply call that immigration. What this is an invasion. It's a completely different policy.
But you mentioned,
can't even call it the same thing.
You mentioned.
I'm going to pause on that for 1 sec. Sorry. Sometimes Piers is like running in on the tail of them talking. So it's almost like I have to interrupt to get in a point. There's not a lot of clean breaks, but I wanted to say, I feel like that another aspect of it too, and they're probably going to get to this. This is a longer interview, is that society has changed as time has gone on. And there's a big generational difference between, say, millennials and then Gen Z. And I presume there will be another big shift with Gen Alpha as they're getting older. But I don't know, like, I feel like a lot of the loud voices or the prominent voices, if you will, in politics, again, I don't know if this is a loud minority or what, but it just, the sensation you get is that there's a lot of louder young people than there are older people. Not that both don't have some sway in how politics are in the world and in this country, but the shift that I'm talking about in society has created an issue such that I just heard someone else, and I don't remember who it was right at this moment, so I can't really give credit, but it's also just a random remark. It's not like it's someone's original material, but they were saying that there's a big movement or a big kind of influx of younger people who don't view nation states or like nationalities as a core identity anymore. So you basically then run into, and this is what I think they'll get to, a question of assimilation. So what that means is if a person migrates here from anywhere else in the world, are they trying to kind of live in a pocket and be left alone by Americans and not really participate in American politics or American way of life and just take what they want from America while kind of maintaining their own identity, maybe kind of, closing themselves off? Or are they becoming Americans? Are they going, okay, we're making this immigration to this country and we're going to become a part of that country because now this is our new home? I feel like that gets missed a lot in all the noise and the smoke and mirrors with politics, a lot of which is disingenuous, but that would, to me, be a valid concern, is if you have people that they used to immigrate and assimilate. In other words, they used to immigrate to become Americans, and now they immigrate just to live in America as some other kind of identity, whether it's religious or cultural or national. That's a very different picture. And I think that Nick is pushing against the latter. He's pushing against people trying to maintain 2 to 3 identities and not putting America first, even though they're willing to immigrate to America and take advantage of the things that are here. They're not calling America home. They're not becoming Americans, if that makes sense.
Mexico in that list. And your father is half Mexican. So,
yeah.
I mean, by your criteria, part of the invasion would include your father, presumably, and his immediate descendants who came from Mexico.
Not really true, because when my father's ancestors came here, it was a small fraction of the total immigrants that came from Mexico. I don't believe that we should have 0 immigrants forever, or even 0 immigrants from non-white countries. But you have to draw the distinction. My father's father, he was here in the 40s and 50s. It was his parents, or I believe either his parents or grandparents, that came here even earlier. Up until 1965, 90% of the immigrants were coming from Europe. I have no problem with that. If we have 10% of them coming from Mexico or Latin America, maybe that's reasonable, but that's not what it is now. Now you've got 10 million illegals in 4 years under Joe Biden, and you got millions more legal immigrants from China, India, Venezuela, El Salvador. And it's so many with no break for assimilation. And they're all...
There it is. No break for assimilation. That's where I thought we were headed.
All from non-white countries. It's transforming what America is. And again, that's the distinction. That's what makes it unacceptable.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe and click the bell so that you're notified when I upload more videos like this. Until next time, think for yourself, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.